Alright, so I've heard from some friends on the grapevine that there's a pretty cheap little mod that you can chuck into your steering rack that kind of changes the way your steering rack mounts to the subframe. That'll increase the weight of your steering a little bit, improve the directness and the feel of the road and the steering in general. And all it is bushings, obviously. So I've opted for the Cusco ones, and also some factory Subaru STI bolts. So let's jump to the shed and I'll show you what we're working with. Alrighty, so this is my box of goodies from Race Division. And all we're going to be using today is this stuff. There is more OEM STI and Toyota goodies in here, which I'll go through another day when I swap out my front control arms. But anyway, here we are. So what Race Division's selling the kit are 2 factory STI bolts, 2 STI spacers, and these 2 Subaru nuts. And the other thing I got from Race Division was some Cusco steering rack bushings. So what's the difference between these 2 bolts, and why am I going to all the effort to change one factory bolt to another? So this is the factory 86 bolt that I just took out of the car. The way it mounts is, goes through the steering rack, pretend that's the steering rack, and then the subframe's actually threaded. So that's how it's affixed. So you can imagine when it's only holding onto the subframe by, I don't know, 10 mil worth of threads, you can see how it would wiggle around a little. Whereas this is the factory STI bolt, which is shitloads longer. And what this does is it mounts to the steering rack in the same way. The subframe's actually sleeved, so it runs the whole way through the subframe. And then using our factory Subaru nut, this goes on to the back of it. So we've got all of this meat inside that sleeve in the subframe, stopping the steering rack from wiggling around as you turn the wheel and as the wheels follow the road and stuff like that. So we'll see how we go. Let's go into the car. Alrighty, so run to the car. Obviously you're gonna have to take this steel tray and the fabric heat shield thing under the gearbox off to access this. This is a steering rack bolt, the 17 mil. So just chuck a 17 mil socket on with an impact or a breaker bar or 2 spanners stacked on each other or whatever. And that comes out just like that. And then you need to get the bushing out. Now, I don't have a tool for that. I don't even know if this that I've knocked up is gonna work, but we'll see. It's not gonna work, the bolt's too short. Alrighty, so just quickly checking back in, I figured out how to get this thing off. So what I've done is, well actually first, I backed these bolts off just to be able to let that drop, and that lets the steering rack drop a little further. And then I have a spare wheel stud in the shed. Doesn't need to be a wheel stud, it can be any bolt really. Put that on there. Got a 32 mil impact socket. Put that on there. Sorry, on there, because that fits over the bushing that's coming out. And then got a C-clamp and just tightened it. So we've got it, I don't know, a third of the way out now. So now I'm going to pull this stud out and put a socket in there and do the same thing. I think that is going to be us. Should just be able to give one last pull. There's it out. Get your socket out. So now we're just got to get this bushing out on this side. After doing that side, Cusco make a tool for this to remove these bushings, and I suggest you just buy the tool because it's a pain in the ass. On this side, what you definitely have to do is cut the flange of the bushing. So all I did was get like a flathead screwdriver with a pretty sharp blade on it, and just worked my way around the bushing. Be careful because you can damage the steering rack there, but you need to do that to be able to get the socket over. If you don't, because of this, I'd love to tell you what it is, but I've got no idea. That gets in the way, so you can't get the socket all the way over. So if you cut that off, socket goes on there, and then we have our wheel stud and our clamp, and we're good as gold. So let's try that again. And it's out. You need a spare pair of hands and someone that can use their brain, and it'll come out. So now we've got this bush out, we're going to put the Cusco one in. Now I was being an idiot and I put the sleeve into one side of the bush already, so I'm hoping I can get it in like that, because as you push the sleeve into these rubberized, it's not a rubber bush but it's not solid, as you push the sleeve in, it expands the bush, right? So now that I've put that sleeve in, it's going to be a bit harder to get in. So I'm going to try and grease it up a bit, grease the inside of the sleeve and whack it in. The other side, I just chucked the sleeve in the freezer for 15-20 minutes, whacked a little bit of grease on it, and in she went. I'm hoping I don't have to pull this back out, but we'll see. And of course, with grease, a little goes a long way, so don't go crazy with it, or it will go everywhere. All right, so as soon as we got to the saucy part, the battery died. So let's try again. All right, so I've got the half bush with the sleeve halfway in. So let's try and get this other half in. Alright, so I might try and feed the bolt on there and see if it squares itself out. I'm not sure if it will. But we're about to find out. Alright, and because this bolt is so long, can you see? Because this bolt's so long, make sure you give it a good couple of threads with your hand, or like a ring spanner, because you can get a lot of play in it. So if you do it with an impact or something straight away, you can cross through it pretty easy. Ask me how I know. Alright, so that started, well, that bush is nice and square now, and it's starting to pull in on this side. So I want to go back to that side, put that bolt back in, and then sort of tighten them together so they go together square. So now they're in, and so now you'll see we have the end of the bolt. So that long bolt I was talking about earlier, it goes through the steering rack, the whole way through that sleeve in the subframe, and then pops out there. So then we get our washer spacer thing that goes in there, and what that does is that kind of works how a hub-centric ring works on a wheel. So that smaller step there, the outer bit, is the same size as the inner of that sleeve. So get that on there, whack the nut on, and the manual, like the service manual, says 120 newton meters, so make sure you get your torque wrench out. And don't forget, 120 newton meters is like 10 to 20 newton meters tighter than you should be doing your wheels up, so it's pretty tight. Cool, and we're done. So don't forget to tighten these bad boys back up, chuck your under trays back on, and then we'll jump in the car and see if it's made a difference or if it was all a waste of time. So install's done, we're in the car, we're on the road. Moral of the story here is, if you're doing DIY, just buy the Cusco tool to get those stock bushings out. It'll be shitloads easier. There's not a whole lot of room in there to play with, particularly if you've got a stock front pipe like I do with that giant cat. There's not a whole lot of room to play around with. In saying that, you can do it with basic tools at home, just a big socket, a smaller socket, and a C-clamp, but an extra set of hands definitely helps. What do I think of these bushings? We're rolling onto a twistier road that doesn't have the best surface, so I feel like it's not a bad way to test and give my impressions of it. Obviously, given what's going on in New South Wales at the moment, we can't go to the track, but I do think this is one of very few mods where what you feel on the road, you'll feel on the track. Because you're not actually changing the dynamics of the steering or the dynamics of the car, there's no reason you won't feel the same gains on track and road. Straight off the bat, what's impressed me the most is just off-center steering. So just the little wheel movements like that, it snaps straight away, left to right, whichever way you're going. You can feel the road quite a bit more. You can feel the car tracking around a bit more on the road, tramlining. The steering doesn't weighten up as much as I feel like a lot of people on the internet have said. It's definitely heavier, but it's not, I don't know, I feel like changing tyres would weighten up your steering a lot more than doing this would. So let's keep rolling on, we'll hit some corners and I'll let you know what I think after that. Alrighty, so I've been for a bit more of a drive, so what do I think? It's good, it's fantastic. It's an incremental increase, but I think a big part of that is due to the fact that the 86 already has awesome steering. So it's not like you're going from dog shit steering to really good steering, because you've already got awesome steering. So any increase is always going to be incremental. I think a big thing to remember, so I'm currently on Hankook RS4s. I'm currently testing these so I can compare them to the Zestinos, like the Zestino range, to sort of outline what I think is a good hybrid road and track tyre that you can daily and you can go to the track and have fun with. And I think something that's important to remember is anything, for the most part, around changing bushes and stuff like that and going stiffer in bushes and mounts, the higher grip tyre you go to, the more it's going to make a difference. So if you go to like a proper R-spec or like a slick and you're on track, the benefits are always going to grow and grow and grow. The faster you're going, the quicker the tyre and the more G-load you're putting through it. Alright, so as I said, we're on your typical Australian back road. The road surface is shit house. There's holes everywhere. The car rattles to buggery, as you can hear. I don't even know if you can hear me talking. It's pretty loud in here. But as I said earlier, I think it is a good place to sort of test this kind of mod out, because you can feel how the car is reacting to the bumps more. You can feel the way the wheels are tracking around more. So if I run over these cat's eyes, for example, in the middle of the road, you could always feel them with the stock bushings and the stock bolts, but you can feel them more, and the bump is kind of harsher, if that makes any sense. But I think overall, you can just feel what's going on more. And also, as I said earlier, before we even got to these roads, the more I've driven it, the more it's become apparent. But even just these little inputs just off center is where I notice a massive difference. The linearity of the steering is the big thing for me. You're turning 10 degrees, you're turning 40 degrees. The whole way through the steering range, it feels like it's doing the same thing. Whereas before, the first 10 sort of degrees of steering input kind of felt a little bit mushy. My car's got 80,000 Ks on it almost, so the rest of my front end bushings are probably flogged out, but I do have a set of hard race pillar ball front lock control arms to go in, so we'll be fixing that too. But just something as simple as those bushings and those bolts, have fixed a big chunk of that already, because lower control arms aren't cheap for this car. So long story short, yes, I'd buy these things. If you haven't already done so, hit subscribe down below. I'll put a link down to the Racefix website as well. So that's where in the past I've always done this kind of thing, just not in video form. It's always been in written form on the blog with photos and stuff like that. So you can go check that out if you're interested in 86s, BRZs, or this car in general. We've also got merch on the store too, if you're interested in that. Jump down below the video and leave a comment if you've done any of these mods before, and if you found them helpful, what you'd like to see from me next in terms of how-tos and mods and stuff like that on the car. And of course, if you've got any feedback, this is the first sort of video like this I've done, so let me know if there's any feedback you've picked up on or anything I could improve on and what you'd like to see next. And thanks for watching.